How many of you, when you were a child, maybe even still, have someone that you called grandma or grandpa or uncle or aunt, and they were in no way related actually to you? Anybody have some people like that? We had a few like that. We had this wonderful lady, and her name was Grandma Harton. And honestly, I can't remember how she became our grandma. I actually never had I guess I did have a grandma, but both of my actual grandmothers passed away before I was born, so I never actually got to enjoy having a grandmother. And one of my grandfathers was gone before I was born. The other grandfather, he died when I was about 5. But we had this lady, her name was Grandma Harton, and this grandma, she could bake. I tell you what, she would come into our house, and what do you got in the cupboard? And I would, let's try some of this and some of that, and never measured a thing. How much you put in? A little dash of that, or a little splash of that, or whatever. And she put, you got some coconut. Well, throw that in there, a little bit of flour, a little bit, some chocolate chips, or whatever. And she would whip something up, and it was phenomenal. All right, she would bake away, and that was my Grandma Harton. My wife, when she bakes, she is a phenomenal baker, as you can tell. All right, she does a fabulous job, but she has all these recipe cards, all right? And sometimes she's got her iPad up there, and sometimes she's got this little stand, and she measures everything out. I'm a measuring kind of guy. I like to measure stuff. When I change my tires from my winter tires to my snow tires, and vice versa, I torque all the wheels, and then hopefully I remember, the week later, I'll go back and I'll retorque them all down. I like to measure things, all right? I've got probably 50 measuring tapes kicking around all over the place. There's one in my truck. It's always there, all right? But I have this laser measurer, and I think I'd spend more time playing with that thing than I actually measure stuff with it. It's kind of a little game. How far away is that wall? We'll take a guess, and we'll measure, how far away the wall is, and so forth. But measuring things, I love to measure. This morning's message is called A Measure of Love. How can you measure love? How can you measure love? We had this little statue years ago when I was just a kid, and it's got this little man on there, and he's got his arms out like this, and on the bottom this little caption says, "I love you this much." And I ask Lenore sometimes, I'll say to how much do you love me? And she'll say something like lots or whatever, or if I've been particularly aggravating that day, all right, which none of you can imagine that, amen? All right, good. And I might say, how much do you love me? And she'll say, enough. I don't like enough. I want more than enough. I want more, okay? But so how do we measure love? We're going to look at a woman today who was basically a social outcast because of her reputation. We'll look a little bit at her reputation in just a moment, but this woman, she was the kind of woman that people didn't necessarily want to be around. But she has got a special lesson for us this morning. I want you to take your Bibles and come with me to Luke chapter 7. Luke chapter 7. We're just going to read one verse to begin with. We're going to read verse 36. Luke 7, verse 36, it says, "And one of the Pharisees desired him," talking about Jesus. One of these Pharisees desired him that he would eat with him. And he went into the Pharisee's house and sat down to meat. Why would a Pharisee want to eat lunch or dinner or whatever meal they were going to have? Why would he want to eat with Jesus? We know that for the most part, not always, but for the most part, the Pharisees were in general, they did not like Jesus. They were looking for things from Jesus that they just didn't have any use for him. But there was one Pharisee who went to meet Jesus, and he had a truer motive. And we'll see in a minute here which kind of Pharisee this guy was that we're going to look at here. But in John chapter 3 and verse 1, very, very famous passage of Scripture. We look at John 3:16. But in John chapter 3 and verse 1, it says, "There was a man of the Pharisees named Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews. The same came to Jesus by night and said unto him, Rabbi, We know that thou art a teacher come from God, for no man can do these miracles that thou doest, except God be with him. As I read this passage this week, something jumped out at me. We look here and it says, the same came to Jesus by night and said unto him, Rabbi, we know that thou art a teacher come from God. Who's the we? The Pharisees. The Pharisees knew that Jesus came from God. So why did they not like him? If anyone should be saying, hey, folks, gather around. This is Jesus. This is the promised Messiah. This is the one that came from God. We know that you came from God, because no man can do the things that you do except God be with him. The Pharisees knew where Jesus came from. But for the most part, they didn't like Jesus. They didn't like him at all. In John chapter 11 and verse 48, it says that, they're worried because if Jesus comes, the Romans are going to come and they're going to take away our place in our nation. They're going to take away our position if we acknowledge who Jesus is. They didn't like him. If you flip over a page or two, keep your finger in Luke 7, but go to Luke chapter 11 and verse 53, and it says, And as he said these things unto them, the scribes and the Pharisees began to urge him vehemently and to provoke him to speak many things, laying wait for him and seeking to catch something out of his mouth that they might accuse him. They were looking for things that they might accuse Jesus of because they didn't want him. They didn't want him. They knew who he was. We saw that. Nicodemus had flatly admitted, we know you're from God. This Pharisee that we're looking at here in Luke chapter 7, verse 36, fits more into that group than he does into the Nicodemus group. And we'll see that as we go through this package. He invites Jesus into his house, and Jesus comes into his house. And it says here in verse 37, And behold, a woman in the city, which was a sinner, when she knew that Jesus sat at meat in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster box of ointment. All right? Now, understand things were much different there than we would do here. If we had a celebrity, you had somebody famous come and stay at your house or come for dinner at your house, pick a celebrity. I don't care who you pick. You pick a celebrity, and they come to your house. You're going to have them come in, and you're going to close the door, and you're going to just talk with that guy. That's not how they did things there. If they had one of these meals where some would come, and Jesus was recognized by many people, and they knew that Jesus was going to be there, other people could come and watch. Wouldn't you like somebody looking over your shoulder while you're eating? All right. Okay, but they would do that. That was customary. They would stand around, and some of the poor people might come and hope for maybe some leftovers that they could have. But it was very common that they would come and they would like to listen. It was entertainment almost. They would like to listen to the conversation as to what was going on. So people were there. So it's not completely out of the ordinary that this lady came. There was probably many other people that came and stood around the outside of this, and as these people sat at this table to eat. But they didn't sit on a chair like we would sit. All right? What they would do is they had these couches that would go around the table, and the table sat a lot lower to the ground, and they would lay down like this on one elbow and have one elbow, and they would eat, all right? And part of the idea, from what I understand, is to keep their feet as far away from the food as possible. That's what they did. And all their feet stuck out from the table. And they were there, and they would lean in there, and they could talk. It seems like a funny position to me. I'd rather be sitting up to eat rather than laying over on one elbow. I'd kind of get tired and have to flip over the other elbow, and then I can't see the other person. But at any rate, that's what they would do. And so picture that as these people are spread out, so it takes up a lot more room, because instead of just, this much of your body, your whole body is stretched out there around, and people would gather around this table here. But we see here, it says, And behold, a woman in the city, which was a sinner. Most theologians believe that this woman was probably a harlot. It doesn't tell us that. Very likely she may have been, all right? But this one thing we do know, she had a reputation for something that was wrong. Whether she was a liar, whether she was a swindler, whether she was just a person who had very bad morals, or whatever, she was famous in the city. This is bad news, whatever her name was. Doesn't give us her name. But she had a terrible reputation. And she came in there, typically you'd think that, why is she even in the Pharisee's house? But she came there into that Pharisee's house, this woman that was a sinner. Behold, a woman in the city which was a sinner, and she knew that Jesus sat at meat in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster box of ointment. This was no chance event that this woman happened to just come. She learned that Jesus was going to be there, and she went home and got this precious box of ointment, this precious alabaster box of ointment, because she wanted to give that to Christ. And she came in there. She was prepared. This wasn't just he's here, I'm going to walk in and I'm going to see what's going on. That is not the case. She went home, got what she needed, and she came back there to see him. Now, obviously, if you understand what's going on here, is these people are all spread out, all right? They're going to, where would the best spot to be? Well, the best spot would be to be at the table, but if you can't be at the table, they're going to want to go around to a place where they can see his face. Who wants to just look at the back of some celebrity's head, right? So most of the people would probably try to crowd around the other side of the table, but this lady went right directly behind Jesus. She went behind him, all right? We see in verse 38, and she stood at his feet behind him, weeping, and began to wash his feet with tears, and did wipe them with the hairs of her head, and kissed his feet, and anointed them with ointment. She stood at his feet behind him, weeping, and began to wash his feet. I can't imagine how many tears it would take to wash somebody's feet. How much is this lady weeping? Remember when I was young, and my dad, as many of you know, my dad started the church in February of 1972, and in September of 1976, it would have happened before that, because he left in September of 1976 to go into the mission field. He went to work for a mission called Underground Evangelism, smuggling Bibles into communist countries where they weren't allowed, and so forth. So he left to do that, and he was based out of British Columbia, and my mom was going to move out there with them, and the option for me to go with them was never even mentioned, all right? And I was 17 at the time. What we were going to do is my sister and I were going to get an apartment together. I can't remember where my brother was probably still at school. He went to school for like 46 years in a row. But the idea was that I was going to live with my sister, and we went around and we looked at some apartments and so forth. And one day my sister said, I want to live alone. I don't want you to come move in with me. Well, at 17, I was devastated from that. I didn't know what to do. I got in my cool little Karmann Ghia, all right? Rusty old Karmann Ghia. Anybody even know what a Karmann Ghia is? We got a few folks. All right, you guys are good people, all right? I have a T-shirt that's got a Karmann Ghia. Actually, I had the T-shirt on last night with a Karmann Ghia. But anyway, I got in that poor car, and I remember driving over Lorne Bridge, bawling my eyes out. What was I going to do at 17? I didn't know where to live. And I remember the tears were flowing, and I was just heartbroken. But you know what? There wasn't enough tears there to wash somebody's feet. I can't imagine the heartbreak of this woman as she stood at Jesus' feet. And at this time, as she stood at Jesus' feet, she's down now on her knees at Jesus' feet, and pouring tears out of her eyes, washing Jesus' feet, and then taking her hair and wiping his feet, and holding his feet, and kissing his feet. And just, it's this word kiss here. I need to explain this word kiss just to kind of clear things up a little bit. This word kiss here is talking about an earnest kiss. It's not a romantic kiss or anything like that, okay? And it's not a simple peck like you would do with, you got a little grandchild that's 7 or maybe even younger than that, and they fall and they got a little owie on their knee, and you give them a little kiss on the knee. It's more than that. It's an earnest, like it's almost like someone would do if I think of the tragedy that happened in Texas just this week, where that Christian camp was wiped out, and at last I heard there was 27 girls missing and one was dead. And I can imagine the parents, when they find that their child and how they would kiss that child, if just so relieved if they caught them, they were still alive. That's the earnestness that this lady is doing here, holding on to Jesus' feet. We see there's of the crowd of people that's here, and there's many people here. Many people here. When Jesus was into town, people came to hear Jesus. People came to see what Jesus might do. But of this crowd of people, this particular passage only talks really about 3. It talks about the guest, that's Jesus. It talks about this woman, the sinner. Whatever it was that she was a sinner. And it talks about the host. And this host here, it says in verse number 39, it says, "Now when the Pharisee, which had bidden him, saw it," when he saw what this woman was doing, "he spake within himself, saying, This man," talking about Jesus, "if he were a prophet, would have known who and what manner of woman this is that toucheth him, for she is a sinner." If Jesus really is a prophet, or he really is as great as everyone says he is, he'd know who this woman is, and he wouldn't let her touch his feet. I think of, obviously Jesus knows what's going on. This couldn't happen to me, because if somebody touches my feet, I kick them in the mouth, because I'm very, very ticklish, all right? But as this Pharisees there, if he knew who she was, he's supposed to be a prophet, there's no way he would allow that to happen. Well, did Jesus know who that woman was? Did Jesus know who Simon this Pharisee was? He knew Simon so well, he knew what Simon was thinking. Simon might as well have said this out loud. If you're really a prophet, you would have known who she was, because Jesus knew exactly what he was thinking. But he didn't know that. He didn't believe that. So Jesus presents to him a parable. "And Jesus answering said unto him," verse 40, "Simon, I have somewhat to say unto thee." Some folks think that because this woman has poured this alabaster box of ointment on his feet, and the person who owns the house's name is Simon, that this is the same Simon that is in Matthew chapter 26 and Mark chapter 14. But it's not. It's a completely different account. The one in Matthew 26 and Mark 14, that man is Simon the leper. Now, could a Pharisee be a leper? Yes, a Pharisee could be a leper. But I'm thinking that if he was a leper, they wouldn't let him be a Pharisee anymore. But at any rate, there's too many differences here. For one thing, this woman pours the ointment on Jesus' feet. And Simon the leper, she pours it on his head. And there's several other differences. It's a completely different account. All right? Completely different account. As a matter of fact, this is the only book that this account is written in. All right? It's important for us to see that. They figure just because his name is Simon, that it must be the same. Well, Simon is a name like Joe. We got one Joe. Where's the other Joe? We got Joe Tifo. All right? But there was Simon Peter. That was his name, Simon. And Jesus had 12 disciples. You know what? 2 of them were named Simon. We have Simon Peter. We have Simon the Canaanite, who's also called Simon Zelotes. All right? We have Simon of Cyrene, who carried Jesus' cross. We have Simon the tanner, where Peter went to stay. We have Judas Iscariot's father. Guess what his name was? You got it. His name was Simon. all right? We have Simon the sorcerer in Acts, all right? It was a very common name. This is the only record. But I want to see here, he says, Jesus answering said unto him, Simon, I have somewhat to say unto thee. After Simon thinks this thought, this guy really a prophet? And Jesus says, I've got something to say to you. And this just blows me away. What's Simon say? And he saith, Master, say on. Like, oh, hypocrite or what? Like, yes, well, Master, say on. He just had this thought about him, like, what is this guy? He's nothing. This guy who thinks he's a prophet, he's nothing. And he says, I got something to tell. Oh, well, Master, speak on. Go ahead. So Jesus tells a little parable. Verse 41, there was a certain creditor which had 2 debtors. The one owed 500 pence, the other 50. And when they had nothing to pay, he frankly forgave them both. Tell me, he says to Simon, tell me therefore, which of them will love him most? We see in some other passages that like a pence, 1 penny, or a denarii was 1 day's wages. All right? So we have the one fellow that owes 500 days' wages, about a year and a half's worth of wages. So I did a little Google search. What's the average? What's the average salary of someone in Ontario? Now, you look at 5 different websites, and they'll all give you 5 different numbers, but they're all pretty close, all right? And the number I had come up with was $69,000, all right? Average wage earner of someone in Ontario. So we're going to put that in today's wages, a year and a half's worth of wages, roughly $100,000, okay, just so we understand. $100,000. The other guy owes about 2 months worth of wages, so he owes $10,000, okay? He owes $10,000. We got 100, and we got $10,000. He says, which one do you think would love him the most, Jesus says. Simon, who is there trying to find a way to trap Jesus, is kind of wondering, is Jesus throwing a trap here? Because what does Simon say? He says, Simon answered and said, I suppose he whom he forgave most. Like, well, it's like, are you trying to trap me, Jesus? And Jesus says, you're right, Simon. You're absolutely right. Ding, 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 you win, okay? You are correct. He says, thou hast rightly judged. But then he looks down at his feet at the woman, but he's talking to Simon. He's talking to Simon. And he says, seest thou this woman? This woman that a minute ago you just finished thinking she is a sinner, and why is Jesus allowing her to touch his feet? Seest thou this woman? I entered into thine house. Thou gavest me no water for my feet, but she hath washed my feet with tears and wiped them with the hairs of her head. Understand here that it's common courtesy here in this time to let somebody wash their feet when they come into your house. They're walking on dirt roads, they're wearing sandals, their feet are dirty. It is just this what happens, okay? One of my favorite people in the Old Testament, everybody knows who it is. It's another Job. I love Joseph, the guy with the coat of many colors, when he's got his when he is second king of all, basically of the whole planet, the most and my water didn't spill. And as he is there and revealing himself to his brothers, and his brothers come to his house. A servant takes him to his house, and Jesus is going to come back. In Genesis chapter 43 and verse 24, it says, and the man brought the men into Joseph's house and gave them water, and they washed their feet and gave their asses provender. That's just common courtesy back then. You give somebody some water to wash their feet. It's just common courtesy. Jesus says, I came into your house. You didn't offer me any water to wash my feet. But this woman has washed my feet with her tears and wiped them with the hairs of her head. He goes on. He says, thou gavest me no kiss, but this woman, since the time I came in, hath not ceased to kiss my feet. it's, again, common courtesy. We here in North America, we like to shake hands. I love shaking hands. Richard and I have got a handshake down figured out, and Brother Sean and I have our own secret handshake, okay? But, and I've tried to do some with some of the kids, and they get all confused. They're not quite sure. We got to train these guys how to properly shake hands. But back in the Bible days, okay, back here in Eastern cultures, and even some places in Europe still do this, where they will kiss one another, not on the lips. They would do this little cheek thing or so forth. It's just common, okay? In Genesis chapter 29 and verse 13, it says, "And it came to pass when Laban heard these tidings of Jacob, his sister's son, that he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house, and he told Laban all these things." Paul tells us in 4 different accounts where he's talking and encouraging his people. This is the custom of the day. This is their culture. In Romans chapter 16 and verse 16, he says, "Salute one another with a holy kiss. The churches of Christ salute you." It's just a common thing. And Jesus says, "I come into your house. You didn't give me water to wash my feet. This woman has washed my feet with her tears and dried with her hair. You didn't give me a kiss. That's customary. You didn't give me a kiss. She has not ceased to kiss my feet. She is just down there weeping, wiping his feet, kissing his feet, pouring this ointment on his feet. She's nonstop. You did none of this. You did none of this." Verse 46, "My head with oil thou didst not anoint, but this woman hath anointed my feet with ointment. Wherefore I say unto thee, Simon the Pharisee, her sins which are many are forgiven, for," here's the key, "she loved much." She loved much. You want a measure of love? Jesus says this is a measure of love. She loved much, but to whom little is forgiven, the same loveth little. When a debt is forgiven, it still has to be paid. When a debt is forgiven, it's not like you can just say, "Okay, well, don't worry about it." Okay? That debt still has to be paid. And the person who forgives that debt pays for that debt. That's what happened with our salvation. When we accept, if you accept Jesus Christ as your personal Savior, it's not like God is just saying, "Okay, well, forget about the sin. We'll just kind of wash it away." That's not exactly what's happening. Jesus paid for your sin. That debt has to be paid for. He paid for that with his life on the cross. It's not just don't worry about it. The debt must be paid. And that's what he's saying here is whom much is forgiven, that debt has been paid, they will love much. But Simon, you don't love much. You don't love much. Understand this. I need to emphasize this point. When Jesus said that her sins were forgiven, it wasn't for her payment of the ointment that she put on. It wasn't because of she paid for her debt with her tears, or paid for her debt with her hair, or paid for her debt with anything else. Because Jesus makes it very clear in verse number 50. He says, "And he said unto the woman, Thy faith hath saved thee. Go in peace." The only thing that anyone ever gets saved by is their faith. "For by grace are ye saved through faith." Okay, it's only faith. It's always been through faith in Christ Jesus and by the grace of what he has done, by the gift of God. But this Pharisee had made 2 very foolish assumptions. First of all, he assumed that he didn't know who this woman was or what this woman had done. And his second foolish assumption was, I am better than that woman. I'm sitting here with Jesus. Jesus made it very clear that what he knew about this woman, and he also made it very clear of what this Pharisee was falling very, very short of what this woman was. This is what this woman is doing. This is what love looks like. That's what Jesus says. She loved much. Verse 42, and Jesus says to the Simeon, he says, "Which of them will love him most?" I don't think there's a single person in this auditorium who has ever had a citywide reputation for being a vile person, whatever that is, whatever this woman had or for any other thing. But my question is, what does your love look like? What does your love look like for God? What does your love look like? Do you ever weep over how far short you fall, I fall, we fall from God's righteousness? Do you consider yourself really not all that bad? Just like that Pharisee there. The Pharisee is, you know what he's doing? He's sitting at the same table that Jesus is sitting at. Mind you, I think the Pharisee is probably at the head of the table, but nonetheless, he's sitting at the table. He's eye-to-eye contact. He's treating Jesus like he's a peer, like we're even. But I really think I'm better than you because you let this thing touch your feet. Where do we consider ourselves? Romans 3:10 says, as it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. In Isaiah 64 and verse 6, the first part of the verse says, but we are all as an unclean thing, and all our righteousnesses are as filthy rags. But what does our love look like? What does our love look like for God? Do we just go on our merry way and just pretend like, we're okay? We're not like those people that are out there on the street corners looking for money. I'm better than they are. We're not like those people that are in those drug houses, well, I'm better than they are. Surely God will love me because look at me, I live in a real house, and so forth. This Pharisee was well-to-do, nice big place, nice big table, room enough for a whole bunch of people to come in and see where he is going to do something wonderful. He is going to entertain Jesus and give him a free meal. What does our love look like? This woman couldn't stop crying, couldn't stop weeping. And Jesus turns to her and he says to her, verse 48, and he said to her, thy sins are forgiven. They that sat at meat with him began to say within themselves, who is this that forgiveth sins also? And he said to the woman, thy faith hath saved thee, go in peace. But Jesus says, this is their love. I actually underline these three words in verse 47. For she loved much. What's the measure of your love? When's the last time you got down and just thank God for his love for you that we don't deserve? We deserve hell. That's what we deserve. Because we're sinners. Everyone in this room, sinners. Everyone in this room. Whether someone knows what we've done or not, God knows. How much do you love him? Do you love him enough to get down on your hands and knees and cry? When someone looks at you, can they tell that you love God? That he is the all in all to you? Or is there just, I just go to church and do my thing? How much do you love him? How much does it show? How could you measure your love? Let's pray. Precious Father, thank you